the goals of these of the intentions is to have some collaboration and interaction around tables and pertinent topics. So we can look at today's theme, that brief outline I gave you at the outset. The second bullet reads, how do I keep my spouse and kids from resenting the church for the time I invest in her or in the church? How do I keep my spouse and kids from resenting? My question to us for discussion is, how did you do that? There's no camera rolling, so we're safe. Was there failure in some regard? How did you keep, if you could write a couple of points down on your paper on how this worked for you, in whatever context your home looked like, whether it was a spouse, whether it was a spouse and kids, or just kids, how did you keep the home from resenting the church for the time that was invested in the church? That's the question of the moment. I'm going to ask my son if he can come up here and join me again. If you could just either jot some thoughts down or a key point. And I'm gonna have Ronnie prime the pump on this one response from a kid's perspective. How did and this was unrehearsed. We haven't talked about this. So what would you say in regards to this question? Now, as a father of 3 kids, and having been raised in a family of 3, some perspective from your end, from keeping kids or spouses from resenting church.
Probably the biggest thing for our home, what worked for us, was we did everything together, like everything. When we had vacations, our free time was in a cheap hotel room playing Uno for hours. And we'd figured out this way to play with 2 or 3 decks at once. And we made up a rule where you can play pile on, where if someone gives you a draw 2, you can match it and make it draw 4, draw 6, draw 8. It would just get ugly, and it would get personal and rude, we'd have so much fun. And my sister had this thing where she wouldn't say draw 2, she would say drawl 2. She couldn't hear her say drawl, We're like, what, Robin? What'd you say, drawl? What is that even? Is that a different game you're playing? Are we not playing Uno anymore? Are we playing one, not Uno, but one? What kind of game you playing, And so all of our time that we did, it was always together. I think as far as resentment goes, it's not limited to just ministry. I mean, a kid can resent any job. It isn't. It's not just pastors that kids hate their dad's jobs. I mean, I saw that a lot in the professional baseball world. I'll get into that story a little bit later, but you'd see a lot of the dads or the ball players that had the money and had the life and had the house and had the contract and had the accolades and the adulation, and their kids hated their guts. And it wasn't because they didn't like their dad's job. If anything, that was their boy's dream too. Like, that's what he wanted to do as well. It was more, it was, this is my thing. The dad saying that, this is my thing, and it takes me away from you. Does that make sense? And that can be, you can be working at the Safeway Bakery and have the same kind of attitude. Does that make sense? So we did everything together. And so some of the things that I have to battle with myself, because I'm new to this pastoring game. I started a few years ago. So is maintaining that attitude, maintaining an atmosphere where church is not my thing, not our thing. Where it's time to go to work. Don't come in my office because Dad's got to get to work. Don't bother me. And of course, there's times where you got to get some privacy, of course. But just in general, we're in this together. And sometimes I just want to get away. Like, okay, the office is my place to exit and get away from you, all you clowns, because I need some me time. I'd always say I got to go to the office to get some real rest. That's what I'd always tell, joke sometimes, But we always did things together. So it was. I remember going on with you to. He would make hospital visits to visit a couple of the sickly or elderly folks that he was in contact with, and he'd bring all 3 of us. Like, what were you thinking? Like, that was crazy, you know? And I was 5 years old, and we're all walking through, and, you know, and walking down the hospital, convalescent homes, you know, and I'd been visiting a couple of the gals that my dad, you know, made contact with, and they're in their, whatever, 80s and 90s, and can barely recognize us, you know, and here we are, and my dad would bring us up, and he'd say, hey, how are you, sister? Here's my little Ronnie, and come say hi, and, you know, and then we'd chat for a little bit, and then he'd say, Ronnie, you want to pray? How about you pray for Lena today? Why don't you pray? You know, just stuff like that may have required a bit more energy. That takes some energy, right, to corral the kids and to keep them in line and to involve them. But that type of intentionality, man, that really dug roots into me personally. Not only for my own walk, because that had a lot to do with it as well, but also like, this isn't my dad's church. This is our church, and this isn't my dad's pastorate. This is our family thing. Stay here.
Another principle that we embraced was we never complained of church members in front of our kids. We never told our kids what so-and-so's parents did to us. We never ranted or raved or cried or lamented someone's vote against us to get a raise in church council, or this person spoke evil of us. The kids never heard that. And all through those years, you had the best view of everybody that was part of our life, even though some of those parents brought great pain to us. In fact, there was a couple of incidences you got, because the kids can't contextualize it. They can't put it in a context where they can work it through. It's become something where kids then defend parents or feel bad for parents, and it internalizes to, I don't like the church. And then it turns into, I hate God because of what my parents experienced. And so there was some episodes when you came into ministry, and I finally shared with you some of the problems I had with people that you esteemed. How did you feel about that?
Yeah, I was in my 30s when they finally kind of broke the news of some of the things that happened that were like, are you kidding me? That really if I had known, there's no telling my response then. There's no telling my response in my 20s. There's no response telling what my response would be now. You know, I mean, they were. I think it takes a lot of wisdom for a parent to know how much, because you don't want to baby your kids so much that they're clueless as to what the world is, what's out there, but also having some wisdom in terms of there's the problems that they came across in church, that's too big of a burden. That's sometimes too big of a burden for even a grown man to bear, let alone a 9-year-old boy. You know, so there was a sense of admiration. At first, when they told me some of the things that happened, and I was like, oh my goodness, man, I can't believe some of those things that actually took place. And there was first a sense of fury, like, I know where they live. Let's go. We'll be there in a few hours, right? Then after calming down, a sense of admiration for my folks, not only for getting through that and doing it well, and keeping the ministry going and doing it well, but also for a sense of admiration, something that I strive to be like, in just the general attitude of not being a whiner. Is that okay? I've always admired about not just my parents, but people in general, when you're talking to them and you find out that they've been going through something recently that no one really knew, but they've been plugging along. Not that you can't tell anybody, but I've always tried to err on the side of being protective of those nearest to me, rather than blabbing all of the church problems. Does that make sense? And of course, we have healthy outlets for that, and where to vent and to do those types of things. But it was I admired my folks so much for. When it comes to a choice, their personal choice of whether they need to vent or whether they want to protect, they always erred on the side of protecting. And sometimes, as a dad, I can be like, as a man, I can say, well, I need to vent. I got to get this out. You know, I know the kids are in the other room and the walls are paper thin, but I'm going to talk. You know what I'm saying? Like, we can err. Well, it's healthy, and in a sense, it is. But they always erred on the side of, I'm going to protect my kids. And I think it created a healthy not only healthy atmosphere then, but a healthy outlook even today.
How about you? How did you make it work in ministry with kids? As you know, you heard someone say that when you have kids in the house, your house is bugged. There's nothing. There's no room safe from little ears. So, how did you keep your spouse or your kids from resenting the church, either because of what took place or the time that you invested that took you away from the house? Any examples of how it worked? Yes, ma'am. Let's pray for them. Wow, what a concept, huh? Especially in churches. Praise the Lord. Other things you experienced that helped address this issue of having either a spouse or a child resenting the church, resenting God, either because of a problem or because of the time you pulled away from. Some other examples of what worked for you all. Anybody comment? What didn't work? Well, you had mentioned too. You said family involvement, and then and just protecting, and then we hear prayer. Prayer. It's amazing how prayer works in this environment. Anything else? Any comments or commentary or questions regarding? Because this is a very critical one right here. Keeping our kids away from resentment because of time that the pastor spends away, because of problems in the church. Yes, sir.
Yeah, there's something to be said about pastors and leaders that don't take themselves too seriously. Um, Sometimes in the church culture, particularly when I was younger, um, and in particularly within some Pentecostal circles, where it's like every church service is like a white knuckle, grind your teeth, let's get through this. I'm going to get saved again tonight, and you guys know what I'm talking about, where it's a grinder, and of course there's times where you got to press in and all that, but I think a thing that made me take the bait into terms of going into ministry, knowing that raised in that environment, was wait, I can be myself, and I'm actually encouraged to, I remember early on when I was just starting to pastor and just starting to speak a lot more, my speaking style varied on the last YouTube clip I watched. Does that make sense? Like whoever I saw, okay, I'm going to be like that guy. It's a bit more. I'm going to be Hayford today, right? Or I'm going to be some young dude that's really energetic, whatever, And my dad, remember him telling me, Ronnie, people like you because of you. They like you, and they come to this church because they saw you at the ball field or at the mall or at the school, and they come to the church, and you're a different guy. That doesn't work. Like, be yourself, and that's. I think that not only is healthy for pastors in general, but man, it's really healthy for our kids. Where dad is dad everywhere. Not only from dad is the same at home and dad is the same behind the pulpit, but also not taking ourselves too seriously as pastors when we're at home as well. My dad wasn't pastor dad at home, goofed off with us like big time, like was always goofing off and doing silly stuff, like he messed with us, like it was fun, like just fun stuff. There are a couple stories where we'd be watching TV, like he did this all the time. He'd steal the remote and then hide around the corner and lower the volume, like mute it. And we're like, we'd be looking at what happened? And Robert, go to, and I'm the youngest, so I got to go up there and manually do it. And as I'm doing it, I can see it going up and then down again, and I'm up and then down. Just that type of vibe where he was intentional about making it fun and funny and goofing off, and that's how he was at the church as well. So it wasn't like let's put on our church face, and let's be a different, perfect person. I mean, of course you got to clean up and talk nicely and stuff, but there was I think there's a healthy atmosphere that is created when our kids know that they can be themselves, and dad's going to be himself, and mom's going to be herself, and there's safety in that type of environment.
You played some baseball, and your brother did too. And there was one incident when Randy was a sophomore at USC, and they go to the College World Series, and it's on ESPN, USC against Cal State Fullerton. And the game that qualifies to make the championship game, Randy pitches. He's about to pitch. But Paula was at the women's retreat up at Camp Cedar Crest with our church. She was being so spiritual. And I fly with my dad to Omaha, Nebraska to watch the College World Series. And I'm there for the whole week, and the whole church knows I'm in the World Series. Paula is being a Jesus person. And I called Paula up at Camp Cedar Crest. I said, Paula, you have to take the next flight. Randy pitches on Friday night. It's the biggest game of his career. I don't care what Bonnie says. You know who she is, right, Bonnie? And I said, you need to come here because this is a once-in-a-lifetime. And so Paula jumps in the plane. She flies out to Omaha, Nebraska. We meet up. She's there in time to see Randy pitch. Meanwhile, all our family and our church friends knew that Paula was up in the mountains. And so a time came during this game, and Randy's pitching, and it's tight, late in the game, and you know how those cameras find the parents of the star player, the pitcher, the batter. Well, this camera found me, and I'm in the aisle seat, and Paula is next to me, and I feel the heat of this lens just right up my nostril, just watching my reaction to every pitch, and I tell Paula, as this pitch is coming down to a walk or a strike, I said, Paula, if Randy strikes this guy out, I'm going to kiss you, okay? She said, okay. And so the crowd's going crazy. He strikes out this batter. The camera is on me, and I lean over to give Paula a kiss. She's thinking it's going to be a peck on the cheek. I try to slime her. I was all over her like this, and she was like this, and this was caught on ESPN, national TV. And so people that knew of us saw this on TV. Were calling church members up that weren't watching it. They said, we just saw your pastor at the College World Series. Yeah, he's up there with his dad. I said, well, he was kissing somebody up there. She says, well, it could have been his mom. You don't kiss your mom that way. And there were people who thought that I was cheating on Paula that didn't know. That I was actually kissing Paula, and so I had to fly home after the game was over and keep my job by telling the church council. A couple of years later, what happened when you were there at College World Series? You're there with USC, and they have a pregame stuff. That video was shown. The video was the same ESPN clip. Was shown on
Your clip?
Yeah.
They showed it. Yeah. They did. That was like the central whole part of like the family, like the College World Series is all about the family vibe and the dads and sons and families, And it all culminated in my dad making out with my mom in the middle of the thing. So it's like, that's my dad. Everyone, is that your dad? You know, like, man, he was ready to go. My mom had wanted none of it, right? You know. So they thought you were trying to kiss some random stranger. That's how she reacted. It was like,
Thanks, Marty. That was enough. All right. Let me share with you things that didn't work. If you're taking notes, I'm going to give you 6 points on things that didn't work as a young pastor. Things I tried to do, things I engaged in unwittingly, looking back now, didn't work as a pastor, as a husband, as a dad. Things that didn't work. Number 1, demanded obedience. That's a surefire killer of home life. Spontaneity in the home is demanded obedience. I'm not sure how you were raised, but I was raised with mom and dad. They loved me. I was a third-generation Pentecostal, but it was a third generation of the very hyper-Pentecostal, very legalistic. Anybody understand that you couldn't wear makeup? Well, guys didn't want to, but girls couldn't wear makeup. Just a number of taboos that were strange in a Pentecostal environment. And so this whole, my dad was raised in that and had a hard time showing love. It was just there was just that culture, that generation where men were men. My dad fought in the Korean War, and those of his generation had a hard time expressing love. It was just something very weird. And so I grew up in a home. I knew I was loved, but it wasn't expressed. It wasn't openly expressed. And we grew up having to say yes, sir, and no, sir, to my dad, or yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am. We could not sass by saying yeah. Saying yeah was sass, and we would get disciplined or spanked. So I grew up in that, and so when I started having kids, I said, my kids are going to say yes, sir, and no, sir to me, and yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am to their mom. And I tried to implement that. Randy, I think, was 4 years old. Robin was 2. Then Ronnie came into the picture. And I believe Randy was somewhere around 7 or 8, and I realized this is not right. I can't demand something like that. I remember I said to Randy, from now on, you don't have to say yes, sir. He says, yes, sir. That's honestly, he said that, yes, sir. I realized there was love can do more than law could ever do. A loving home, a loving pop, a loving mom, and that love can make a child do more than any type of law demands us to do. And so I realized, looking back, that demanded obedience did not work. And when that is implemented in the home, then the first chance a child gets, they leave that home. They want to leave. They want to get out from under that environment. Demanded obedience didn't work. Secondly, marital unhealth didn't work. I had said earlier that if you have kids, your house is bugged. They pick up everything. Marital health. When my wife and I were going through a season where I was angry or she was upset, it affected the entire family. I remember we used to drive together to church in the same car, and we'd arrive in the parking lot, and we'd get out of the car, the kids, and then us, me and Paula. And my best friend at church would beat me to the church, and he would see us coming out of the car. And he told me afterwards, he goes, Pastor Ron, I can tell how your morning was at your house before even talking to you. I said, well, how did you find that out? I look at the face of your daughter when she comes out of the car. If her face is upturned with a smile and you had a great morning, it's going to be a great sermon. I see your daughter coming out. She's obedient. She's proper. But there's a continence of disappointment and sadness. I can tell. And so this idea of marital unhealth is not going to affect anything other than my spouse is wrong. It affects everybody in the home. And if I can have you again, son, come up this way. Help me out here regarding how you saw that played out. Your mom and I are having a spat or knockdown, drag out, and you're in the middle of it with your brother and sister. We're buying Christmas presents for your cousins, and I'm asking you. And
yeah, kids remember everything, right? Just FYI, young fam, they're going to remember everything. Like, how many parents can say amen? They're going to remember everything. There was a time, the story that my dad's referring to is there was a Christmas season where we had a bunch of cousins in our family, and so we do a gift exchange. We'd pick names out during Thanksgiving dinner, and that was who we had. And so the whole family was out. We do everything together, right? We're out doing shopping, a couple weeks before Christmas, and they must have been having some type of issues, because when you have some type of issues, even the little things turn into issues, right? Like, particularly like, what Christmas gift are we going to buy for all of our cousins, right? Three cousins, and we're at this TJ Maxx or something, and my mom wanted to buy our gift exchange people wanted to buy him like sporty college sweatshirts, like UCLA or whatever, you know what I'm saying? And my dad, for some reason, he wanted everyone to get dressy sweatshirts, dressy ones that you wear to like sweaters that you want to wear to Sunday morning, And so me and my brother and sister are standing there, and they're in the middle of TJ Maxx, and for some reason my dad just put his foot down. He wanted to get dressy sweaters. Like, no, this is Christmas. Let's get them something. We do this once a year, and the tone got a little like firm. We're doing this once a year, and let's just get him a good thing. And my mom's like, well, no, let's get him some sweatshirts. Like they're going back and forth. They're going right toe to toe in the middle of TJ Maxx, and me and my brother and sister are like watching. And my dad looks over to us, the three of us, and he's like, kids, wouldn't you want a nice sweater? Wouldn't you want that? And we're like, yes, Dad, we love you. We love you. Mom's wrong. I don't know what's wrong with her, So right there, like, it was, you could tell, like, that the issue wasn't a sweater issue, right? There's something obviously behind it, but the kids are always in the middle of that. They can pick up on that dynamic.
Thanks, Ronnie. Keep helping me out. What didn't work was demanded obedience. What didn't work was marital unhealth. I remember what happened one year early in our ministry. Kids were young. I arrived at church, and Paula and I, or me, okay, I was upset for something that Paula didn't do or did do. And I arrived at church, and I was just out of sorts. And Paula leads worship. I don't know how she's able to switch it on. She just was able to pull it off. And I'm in the front row just still trying to get through, the stern, set jaw, and trying to worship God. And the Lord rebuked me and said, with your attitude, you're not going to be teachable, nor will the people you're pastoring be teachable for you unless you repent. And so Paula's leading worship, and the Lord impressed me to go ahead and stop the service and make this right with Paula. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let this moment pass. So as Paula's leading worship, I get out of my seat. I go to the front. I said, Paula, I've got something to say. She gives me the microphone. And I use pastor speak. I said, the Lord's speaking to our church. And he wants us to be aware that any attitude we have against each other will hinder the flow of ministry and worship. And we need to make these things right before we continue this service. I said, this is what God wants us to do. Let's all go outside back to our cars, make it right, and then come back into the house of God and have service. I dropped the microphone. I grabbed Paula. I walked out of the church. There was dead silence. We go to the parking lot, and sure enough, the entire church walks out behind us, and they go to their cars. And I'm weeping. I said, Paula, I am so sorry. I've blown it once again. Please forgive me. I can't have church service with this thing in my heart. And so people were out in their cars. They were wondering, it's Pastor Ron again, making up with Paula again. This is a new way to make up with Paula. But that's how marital unhealth was so critical for me, that even stopping an entire church service, walking out and making it right and coming back in was what we had to do. The third thing that didn't work was church member parenting influence. When a church member, they influence me in how I should parent. I'm not sure if that's the right phrase. Church member parenting influence. Don't raise your hand, but I wonder if how many of us here have had members of our church that somehow subtly or not so subtly try to teach you how to raise your kids. and influence you with principles or perspectives. One of my most regretful seasons is allowing other church members' strong influence in my life caused me to change how I raise my kids. In other words, I abdicated the responsibility to set the culture in my home and let other parents try to set that culture in my home. It was a very weird season in our young family's life, and that just didn't work. Now, that may have worked for that lady or that parent that were homeschooling or that were going through some wonderful teaching thing, but it wasn't going to work for us. So that didn't work. Demanded obedience didn't work. Marital unhealth did not work. Church member parenting influence didn't work. And number 4, what didn't work in our unbeatable team was having a sick or a lean soul. A lean soul. That didn't work. In other words, when I was experiencing poor habits, poor spiritual habits, or engaging in tendencies that were detrimental, or making selfish choices for myself and being selfish in its application, a sick or a lean soul. Don't you know that whatever is taking place in here is going to bleed out in ministry? And I discovered that this idea of our team being unbeatable, what didn't work is when I allowed my soul, my walk with God, to be affected and kind of just drag through this process. A sick or a lean soul. Number 5, what didn't work was underexpressed love. Underexpressed love. I mentioned to you that I was raised in a home where my dad, a loving man, a caring man, a godly man, but like all of us had quirks, peculiarities, habits, shortcomings, and one was a difficulty to express love. And I was going down that track myself. And I'll never forget an episode that happened to me early in my parenting. I was in an airplane. We were going to go someplace, and I had Randy, my oldest, on my seat to my left, and Paula to my right. And a few rows in front of us was another father, wife, and son. And when he got to the plane, I said, Randy, buckle your seatbelt. I would just go through the paces. Okay, sons, don't move. As a matter of fact, this is his first flight. In front of me with this parent, about our same age, with their son, and this son was crawling all over his dad, hugging him, kissing him. It was a sight. It was a wonderful sight where this father was allowing his son to express love unashamedly. And I had my son that was respectful and obedient and doing the right thing. And so I saw that parent and that dad enjoying the expressed love of his son. And I looked at what I had to my left, and I knew Randy loved me. I knew that he was, and it was expressed in obedience. It was expressed in responding to me. But nonetheless, he was not touching me. He was not embracing me. And I remember when that plane took off, the child in front was finally strapped in, that I had made a vow that I was not going to be a dad that perpetuated an environment where that hugging and touching and embracing. I was not going to raise a home without that. And so something clicked in me when I became a dad who loved the Lord, loved my kids, but I was going to err on anything. It was going to be overexpressed love. And letting that to be embraced, hugged. And even today, whenever I see my oldest son, who's, how old is he now, 39? 38, 39? When he was playing professional baseball, I'll never forget, he went to Dodger Stadium, and he was in the bullpen warming up before the game started. And I get down to the rail, and I get his attention. He says, Randy, over here. And so he jogs to the edge of the rail on the left field side, And he sees me, throws his glove down, and he hugs me, and I kiss him in the cheek. And he kisses me. He says, Dad, I love you. Glad you can make it here to the game. And I heard a couple of people gasp in amazement at two adults kissing each other on a baseball field. In fact, a couple have said, can we take a picture of you guys? This is so wonderful, the expression. And so even today, the expression, maybe the overexpressed expression of love and tenderness is something that I greatly cherish with kids. So what didn't work is underexpressed love. And number 6, what didn't work in this environment was viewing the kids all the same. I figured out that if I got the first kid right, he's my prototype. And then everybody else falls into suit. But the second child was a girl. I couldn't treat Robin that way. And then Ronnie came into the picture. He was different altogether in a lot of ways. So viewing the kids just as one unit or viewing them was not healthy. I had to realize they were, which it sounds strange, I had to see them as individuals. I had to see them with their uniqueness and peculiarities. Come here, son. Give me a hand here. An incident that highlighted this, son, was when we were in the car next to Alpha Beta on Slauson Avenue, and there was an accident in front of us. Remember that incident? Yeah. And Randy says one word would define how he viewed life. Robin said another word would define it, and then you said whatever you said. Yeah. Remember that? Yeah. What was that transaction? What was that was said by Randy and Robin?
Well, Randy asked he was the oldest and the most matter of fact, and he asked the most obvious question of what happened. So, what happened here? And so my dad said, there's an accident, and looked like some stuff happened, and, there's an accident, so we got to deal with it. And then Robin was next, and she has a question, and she said, well, how did it happen? Isn't that right? Then Dad digs a little deeper. He says, just give me the facts. Robin says, well, give me some more facts. How did it happen? And he said, well, maybe, the dad and mom were arguing about sweaters over Christmas. I don't know. And they must have gotten into an accident. Well, I was the youngest, and I was a little different, and I was used to hearing the matter-of-fact questions, and so I had a bigger imagination. I like to call it. They just would say that I was a little weirder. Randy said, "What happened?" Robin said, "How did it happen?" And I was always thinking outside the box. And as we drive by this scene where there's this accident here, and I said, "Dad, if a spaceship landed right now, what would happen?" And they all just kind of, what? What did you say? That was always I don't know, I was just a weird kid. That's kind of how I pastor too. So we were just different birds. Yeah, different kids, big time. Yeah.
And by the way, this has been unrehearsed. We haven't done this. This is our last gig on this, maybe our last ever. So we're getting this thing out. Let me go back to that second bullet where it says, how do I keep my spouse and my kids from resenting the church for the time I invest? Let me add to that the responses we heard and we gave. My take on this is, how do you keep your kids and your spouse from resenting? You want to be the same person behind the pulpit as you are behind the front door. Be the same person. I have this word down, integrity. And you probably know this, the word integrity comes from the word integer. It's a math term, which means there's no parts. It's one whole. And so this idea of living in integrous, or being a person of integrity, at its root is that a man of God, a pastor, a dad, doesn't have compartments. It's one whole. You're the same person from the pulpit and behind the church door. I think that's very, very healthy if one of the negatives that young kids see of preachers and Christians is that they are all a bunch of hypocrites. Hypocrites. And that may be one of the main reasons why kids ultimately just deny the faith, or they get angry at God or the church, is they see it's not working in real life. And so I would submit to you, how do you keep your spouse or your kids, especially your kids, from resenting church? Is that you're the same person. There's no compartments. There's not the home dad and the church dad and the ministry dad and the wife, the husband dad, the fun dad. You're the same person. You're the same person. And that the kids can be themselves without unnecessary expectations placed on them from church members. Be yourself. I had an epiphany when I was pastoring in Pico Rivera. It was probably in the mid-'90s. The church wasn't always healthy. It wasn't a large church. We always around 90, 70, 80, 90, bump down, get up, but always around 70 to 90. And I said earlier how the church I was pastoring at that time, I don't even think I would have enjoyed going to my church, which is a bad environment. As Ronnie said, every service, people tried to make it a very critical, pressure time. And there was a church Sunday, I was in my office about to come to the pulpit, and I didn't want to go up, which was tough because I was preaching that Sunday, and I had to gather myself, and I heard the Lord speak into my heart 4 things that turned ministry around, both culturally and family-wise. 4 things God said to me that changed everything. The first one I heard the Lord say to my heart was, Ron, just be yourself. Be yourself. Now, to many of us here, that is a given. That is obvious. Maybe you have a strong sense of self. You're self-aware. You know you are unique. And this was a no-brainer. But to me, as Ronnie said there early on in his ministry, he was the person he saw last on YouTube. Well, that was me for a number of years. I didn't know who I was. The people I would invite to church from the neighborhood, the parks, and the streets that come to the church to hear me preach, and I was a totally different person. And so God says to me, Ron, be yourself. There are people who need to be reached by someone with your voice. And if your voice does not give the gospel in the context of your life, they're not going to stay. They'll go someplace else. Ron, be yourself. The second thing the Lord shared with me after he said that, he says, Ron, don't take yourself too seriously. I have been known to use a jackass to speak for me. Don't take yourself too seriously. And so this idea of church being such a, like Ron said, a white knuckler, a very urgent message every single Sunday, I loosen it up. I didn't take myself too seriously, or even that church moment too seriously, because I was expressing who I was. The third thing he said to me was, speak of the things that are real to you. Speak of the things that are real to you. And the fourth thing was, leave the rest up to me. Be yourself. Don't take yourself too seriously. Speak of the things that are real to you. And leave the rest up to me. And so this idea of being myself, it freed me, and the church began to change its culture and how it expressed itself through salvation, through, as Rick said, Rick mentioned how in our church today in Las Vegas, it's just a wonderful culture. That wasn't the case when we started. It was a very unusual church culture. It was not happy. It was not what we were. So how do we keep our spouse, our kids resenting the church? Live a life of integrity. Another point under this another answer to this question is always make home life fun and special. The last bullet I have here is there needs to be clear boundaries of marriage and family time. Clear boundaries of marriage and family time. let's go to that the outline we have that I gave you at the outset, God's Unbeatable Team. I talked about how to maintain a strong home life. I defined what, in my estimation, what a home life looks like that's strong amidst the demands of ministry. Talked about how to keep our spouse and or kids from resenting the church for the time that we invest. Ronnie mentioned a couple of things. There was some input from our group. The third bullet I have here is how do I encourage a family partnership in ministry? How do you encourage? I think Ronnie had mentioned a little bit about having us engaged in practical stuff. There's a guy in our church right now who I believe God is going to raise in ministry. He's a young man in his mid-30s, and what he's longing for is a ministry, an environment where he can minister with his kids. He's right now a mucky-muck with Delta there at McCarran Airport, and he has this image of ministry where kids are involved in ministry somehow, some way, and which he says that should be incorporated in a pastoral role if ever that happens. And so I told him, if it's not happening now in a regular environment, it's not going to happen when you become a pastor. In fact, it's just the opposite. When you become a pastor, there's so many other things that have to take place that the particularities of raising kids and having them involved, they fall by the wayside. And so there is just the need to find ourselves being creative and having kids involved in our life. The next bullet we have that we're talking about in our theme, number 4, is what healthy parameters and boundaries should I have with regards to friendships with people that I pastor or employ? What healthy parameters and boundaries should I have with regards to friendships with people that I pastor or employ? Let's turn this around a little bit. And at your table, can you talk about a couple of points that you want to raise on how you address that? Did you have difficulty with boundaries that from members that want to get too close, or how was that in your ministry? How's that look in your life now, in your staff and in your church? Talk about that, please. What healthy parameters and boundaries should you have with regards to friendships and people that you pastor or that you employ? Go ahead and turn around and discuss that question amongst your table. All right. Let me go ahead and sit down here for this to discuss that bullet point that we were all talking about. And that is, what healthy parameters and boundaries should I have with regards to friendships with people I pastor or employ? How many here have experienced disappointment with relationships? All of us. I should have asked, yeah, who hasn't? You stay long enough in ministry, you're going to be disappointed. And hopefully your discussion point either brought some things up, referred to some episodes that helped you get out of that. But the longer you stay in ministry, looking back, my most vulnerable times is when I was younger. You know why? I was idealistic. I was naive. Everybody is good people. Who would speak against me? Who would not agree with how I'm living? The whole shot. So looking back, I'm looking at moments and seasons of my life, and one in particular that was very, very painful. And I think all of us have had those episodes. So let me hear what you've said at your table, and whatever context. What healthy parameters or boundaries have you used in regards to relationships in church that has helped, whether as a result of a poor experience or something you learned early on that has kept there a healthy friendships with people?